Impressions that things like the Middle East peace process shouldn't be put on one side is that some of these key issues, Israel's talks with the Palestinians, also trying to get tough with Iran because it still hasn't satisfactorily answered the international community on the offers that have been made on its uranium enrichment program, that these issues will all get set to one side by nervous leaders, the Israelis and others, who are saying, look, we can't talk about this right now. There are much more important things happening in the Middle East.
And Mark Malibran, we're also in this curious position of putting our faith in the army to deliver a democratic outcome in Egypt.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where tonight is certainly a night to celebrate, but tomorrow morning I think it's going to be a real time for reflection, because, you know, I think this is really two armies. It's a younger army of people who were out there trying to guard the square and who let kids and families climb all over the tanks and clearly felt a generational empathy. But it's an army also of elderly generals who've been some of the most conservative backers of President Mubarak for the last 30 years. And so I think you're going to see a fissure within the army if the generals try and kind of hold out for stability over democracy.
All right, Mark Malibran, Mark Urban, thanks to you both. Well, throughout the crisis in Egypt, Western governments have chosen their words very carefully, deeply conscious of sensitivity about so-called diktats from abroad. That was also the case during Iran's green revolution that never was in the summer of 2009. But it turns out that behind the scenes, the US State Department and the British government have long been engaging with youth groups from Iran, Egypt and elsewhere and coaching them on how to harness online tools, including social networking, to mobilize people. Here's Richard Watson.
You're out of fashion. Your moment's over.
There's no doubt that the Egyptian protest movement is a testament to grassroots activism, but any suggestion that it's entirely leaderless would be wide of the mark. Events have been driven by a key group of activists.
You're out of fashion, so just forget it now.
These are the leaders of this influential group who've harnessed the mobile phone to the power of the internet, texting and tweeting minute-by-minute news calling for support. This is the April the 6th movement, a reference to a highly successful textile strike organised through the social networking site Facebook in 2008. 6 months after the Egyptian strike, one of the leaders of the April the 6th movement was invited to attend a workshop in New York. There he joined a network of international activists called to discuss ways of supporting non-violent protests against authoritarian regimes across the world. That meeting was funded by the US State Department as part of a new initiative called Public Diplomacy 2.0.
I believe that God has planted in every human heart the desire to live in freedom. And even when that desire is crushed by tyranny for decades, it will rise again.
Exporting democratic values was central to the former president's ideology. Iraq was meant to be part of that, but there was also more subtle work going on. And this is the man responsible, Jim Glassman, former Undersecretary for State under George Bush.
We developed a different way to communicate, and I called it Public Diplomacy 2.0, and the idea was that we would be conveners or facilitators of conversations, and big conversations, broad, deep conversations, in which our views would be one of many that would be expressed. So that was the idea, and luckily technology was on our side, because this is what social media do, this is what social networks are all about.
The State Department had been inspired by the amazingly successful grassroots demonstrations in Colombia against FARC guerrillas, organised through Facebook. And it was this enthusiasm for social change that led to the State Department funding the New York conference in December 2008. Several Egyptian activists, including Ahmed Saleh from the April the 6th movement, were invited.
There was opposition in Egypt to any members of the April 6th movement coming to the United States. In fact, we invited, I think it was 3 or 4 people. One of them was stopped on his way to the airport. Another one had his passport taken away. So Saleh was the only one, as I recall, who actually got out of Egypt and came to our meeting.
Social networking has played a huge part in subsequent protests, organising non-violent protesters for the overthrow of the Moldovan regime, and then Iran in 2009. But there, the state crushed opposition and even used the web to track down internet activists. Some have been hanged.
So Facebook is really helping us.
The New York-based Alliance of Youth Movements, the body which the State Department funded in 2008, has supported protesters around the world. Here they're Skyping advice to Pakistan. It's also received British government funding. It's now seeking new money, though, from Google, amongst others, for projects to keep activists safe.
We don't have a political agenda, and we appreciate that sometimes it's a tight line, right? So our goal and our mission is really to enable civil society, and in putting those tools out there, showing how they can be used.
But facilitating non-violent protests often dovetails with Western strategic goals.
We're not ashamed to be Americans. We're not ashamed to have strong values that we want to espouse and promote around the world. But we also want to be effective, and the most effective means of communicating and ultimately influencing, let's not kid ourselves, that's what public diplomacy is all about. It's about influence to meet strategic goals. It's a lot easier to be influential if other people, rather than U.S. government officials, are making the pronouncements, are joining the conversation.
Once these networks are unleashed, though, no one can be absolutely sure in which direction they'll travel. Now, for the libertarians under George Bush, this is no problem, because they believe their arguments about freedom and democracy will win the day. But it's also true that sometimes the West has supported dictators in the name of stability and counterterrorism. And this means this path is by no means a straightforward one.
Richard Watson, the review show is up next, and Martha's in Glasgow to tell us what's in store. Martha?
Thanks, Michelle. Tonight, Helen Baxendale, Johan Harry, Mark Ravenhill and Liz Lockhead are with me to discuss the Coen brothers' latest film, True Grit, Matt Smith as Christopher Isherwood, and a new novel from David Vann. Join us in a few minutes' time.
Thanks, Martha. And that's all from Newsnight tonight, as Egypt enters a new era with Hosni Mubarak swept from power after 30 years. From all the team here, good night.